Cold wind blew from the north, down the deserted stretch of Park Avenue, somewhere in the East 70s. Kate Brad remembered walking these streets with the X-Men as a girl. She'd been, 13 when she first joined up? A lot had changed in the last 20 years. This particular neighborhood was hardcore rogue territory. The rogues were a criminal mafia now, more or less, but they had their beginnings in the organized anti-mutant militias of the 2020s. Of all the places in the city for Logan to want to meet, he had to pick rogue territory. It made a kind of sense, since the Sentinels didn't even bother monitoring this part of the city. The rogues did their work for them here. The plywood sheet under her foot gave and tilted, spilling her not into a hole, but down a steep ramp into darkness. She tumbled and landed hard, realizing that she'd walked into a trap. And in rogue territory, that could mean only one thing. The three men looking at her from the other side of the room were rogues, and she was in a lot of trouble. It was some kind of living space, with filthy mattresses along the walls. The three men stood looking at her with malevolent glee, around a tabletop covered with the remains of 1,000 melted candles. The walls were lined with rusted and bent metal shelving units, some of which still had ancient canned goods on them.
Hey, look what we got here. Oh, little Mutie tripped and fell. What are you doing out of the camp, little Mutie?
Sentinel business.
All three of them were looking at her throat, exposed when her coat had come open during her tumble down the ramp. The Mad Hatter stepped forward.
Inhibitor Caller says you're fair game, little Mutie.
All three men closed a ring around Kate.
And even if you are on Sentinel business, we hate them almost as much as we hate you.
Beg all you want, sweetheart. Scream all you want. Even if people hear, no one's coming to help you. You're gonna be a long time dying, Mutie.
Maybe so, Kate thought, but she wasn't going to just let it happen. Expecting her to be cowed, Mohawk came a little too close. Kate snapped a straight kick right up into his gut. Mohawk doubled over, dropping to his knees. These sounds came from somewhere in the darkness, beyond the reach of the candles on the table. Were the other two fighting over something? Over her? Kate scrambled backward away from Mohawk.
Bravo! George! Get her! Hold her! I'm gonna flay this Mutie alive!
No, you're not, bub.
And from the darkness stepped Logan.
You're gonna step back from the lady, or join your two pals here in the land of traumatic brain injuries.
Relief crashed over Kate. He'd tracked her, he must have. But had the Sentinels tracked him? If he hadn't used his claws, they wouldn't have noticed any mutant activity, unless they'd developed some new surveillance tech. She didn't know. They were always creating new ways to find and kill mutants, and mutant sympathizers, or anyone else they thought might oppose their plans.
You giving Big Alex orders? On his own turf? Is that what you're doing, short stuff?
Big Alex drew a knife.
Cool. I like to earn my fun. You want the little Mutie, old man? You come get her.
If you say so. But don't say I didn't warn you.
Oh, ah!
Kate's heart had jumped into her throat when she'd seen Logan's hands drop to waist level and his fists turn over, just as they always had right before he unsheathed his claws. But this time he hadn't done that.
You okay, Kate?
I'm fine. But calls this close, I can live without.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
He looked up the ramp and listened for a moment.
Come on, let's roll.
When they were out on the street again, Kate started to relax. At least as much as a mutant in New York under Sentinel control could ever relax.
So tell me, Colonel Logan, how's life in the Canadian Resistance Army?
Thrill a minute, darling. The word from London is that everything's on automatic. The minute the Sentinels start to move out of North America, every nuclear power is gonna launch a full-scale strike.
Then it's up to the X-Men.
It felt good to say that, as if the words could give the X-Men the power they'd once had.
So what else is new?
Logan held out his hand, palm up, displaying a small machined piece of metal. It was a short tube with a set of coils around its middle and a disc attached to one side of the coils.
Here you go. Last bit of the jammer. The FCA eggheads made it out of an alloy that shouldn't show up on the Sentinel scanners. You ought to be able to walk right into the camp with it.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, it is. Phase 2 begins at midnight sharp. You'll see the sign I left. Be ready.
We will.
She paused, not quite ready to leave him yet. Seeing a free mutant was wonderful, inspiring even, but knowing she would soon be walking back through the gates of the camp made Kate want to run away. Maybe to Canada, but she couldn't leave her friends. As she had said, it was up to the X-Men.
Logan? You think this will work?
It better. There are 1,000 warheads pointed at us and some itchy trigger fingers on their buttons. The second Europe thinks the Sentinels are moving out past North America, we're gonna be so much ash up in the jet stream.
Something about this image struck Kate. It reminded her of her life before the inhibitor collar, when she had been able to phase. The feeling of individual molecules passing through her body, the incredible rush of knowing you could do something that maybe only one other person in the world could do. A lot had changed, but maybe they could change it back.
Get on home, little kid. You don't want the Sentinels looking at you too close.
Kate zipped up her camp jumpsuit over the jammer component, tucked into a tear in the inside lining.
We won't get another chance, will we?
Nope. If this doesn't work, we're all gonna die, kid. Simple as that.
Right.
That's why it has to work. Catch you later. You know when and where.
Yeah. Later.
They had already said more than was prudent, given the possibility of Sentinel surveillance. Kate felt Logan's eyes on her as she walked the last few blocks to the bus station. She made her way across 5th Avenue from Central Park, where the 79th Street transverse road disappeared into the forest. It had been a long time, more than a decade, since New York City had last maintained the park. The buses themselves hadn't run on diesel or natural gas or electricity for years. Now they were pulled by teams of horses. As she approached the buses, she was keenly aware not just of her inhibitor collar, but also of her camp coverall, which bore a large black M on the back, branding her as a mutant. As part of the Mutant Control Act of 2019, the Sentinels and their human abettors had issued classifications. H meant regular human, free of active mutations or genetic predisposition to them. This group didn't have to dress or conduct themselves in any particular way, but many of them wore a block H on their clothing as a mark of pride and genetic purity. The letter A stood for anomalous, a category of people whose genomes contained the potential for active mutations. A's could not breed and were required to display their letter. And then there was the letter M. The only time an M was seen in the general populace was when the Sentinels sent one on a specific errand, as they had Kate. Attacks on mutants outside the camp were rare, but only because it was highly unusual for a mutant to be granted the privilege of exiting the base. Kate held that privilege dear, both because it was necessary to the plan and because it gave her a chance to see what was becoming of the United States of America. On the other hand, if that plan worked, she would never have need of her exit privileges again. Kate got off the bus near Yankee Stadium. She crossed the parking lots to the camp gates, where 2 Sentinels stood guard. One of them spoke as she approached.
Mutant 187, you are behind schedule. Explain.
Kate chose her words carefully to keep the Sentinel sensors from detecting hesitation or omission. She'd rehearsed possible responses for days, anticipating this scenario.
I was attacked by rogues on Park Avenue. I escaped. That caused the delay.
Encephaloscan indicates truthful response. Proceed.
Luckily for Kate, the Sentinel did not interrogate her further. It would have been very easy to get caught in a lie, which would likely mean execution on the spot. If the Sentinel were even slightly uncertain, it would subject her to a process of exhaustive and humiliating interrogations that might uncover the jammer component. That would end the plan before it ever had a chance to begin. But none of that happened. Once she had passed through the security checkpoint at the gate, Kate walked along the fence line, staying away from the maze-like interior of the camp. It was dangerous in there. Kate headed for the medical facility, sticking to the open spaces within sight of the Sentinel guards posted along the fence. She walked by Kurt's grave and tried not to look at all the others. The past was past. She had to stay focused on the future, on making sure they would have one. She stepped inside and immediately felt safer.
Kate.
First to meet her inside the door was Aurora Monroe, Kate's guiding light when she'd first come to the X-Men, all those years ago. The intervening years showed in a slight rounding of Aurora's features and figure, but she was still strong and graceful, with an air of calm command that belied her X-Men name, Storm.
It's very good to see you.
Just behind her came Franklin Richards, who, having reached middle age, had the same pattern of gray at his temples as his late father, Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four.
We were starting to get worried.
Rachel Summers looked up from a table in the common space just inside the front doorway. Her red hair had been chopped raggedly short by her own hand. Her face was perpetually drawn and pale, as if she hadn't had a good night's sleep in decades. Rachel was something of a mystery to the rest of them. Even Franklin, whom Rachel had married soon after being imprisoned. Kate knew nothing about Rachel's past, which seemed to be a forbidden topic of discussion. This had always struck Kate as unfair. Rachel was a telepath, and therefore had probably learned everything there was to know about the rest of them before the Sentinels had forced an inhibitor collar on her. Hanging back from the group was Magneto in his wheelchair. He'd been crippled by a Sentinel raid on his secret base in the Caribbean, during which all of his closest Brotherhood lieutenants had been killed. He looked much the same as he always had, his face already lined and his unruly shock of gray hair never changing. It was odd to see, in light of how the others had aged.
Sorry I'm late. I ran into a rogue pack.
Are you all right?
Kate's own husband, Peter Alexandreyevich Rasputin, moved to her. It had been a long time since anyone called him Colossus. Even when he wasn't transformed into shining organic steel, as he had not done for many years, he was still a mountainous presence.
Yeah, they ran into Wolverine.
He didn't do anything, did he?
No, nothing that would draw the Sentinel's attention. Logan's smarter than that.
It's not his intelligence I question, Kate. It's his temper.
Well, I have the final module. Logan's gonna do his part at midnight like we talked about. Phase 1 has to be complete by then.
Phase 1. How normal we make it sound. And yet what we contemplate is so fantastic, I still cannot believe it is possible.
Strange words, Pyotr Alexandreyevich, coming from one who's seen and done the things you have.
Magneto moved his wheelchair slowly forward. He was no longer an enemy. There were too few mutants left to permit differences among them, but he still remained somewhat aloof from the other 5. Old enmities took longer than 20 years to fully die out.
I have ever been a simple man, old friend. More farmer in my soul than superhero.
It may be just what we need. A little touch of the new Soviet man. Optimism, the will to move forward no matter what the cost. If there were any alternative, we would take it. But if we do nothing, the world will be at war by tomorrow. By the day after, North America will be craters and ashes. Our actions may not make things better, either for us or for humanity as a whole, but we certainly cannot make them worse.
How easily he slipped into the role of leader, Kate noted. He spoke for them all, incorporated their concerns and fears, and turned them into strength. No wonder he had been such a dangerous enemy.
My dear Rachel, so much depends on you tonight.
I won't fail, Magnus. I've been meditating all day. Once the jammer's operational, we can start any time.
Then what are we waiting for?
A moment, my wife. Would you excuse us, Magnus?
Of course.
I have my doubts. Can this work? And even if it can, should it? We are proposing to toy with the basic fabric of reality. What happens if we succeed? What might we unmake?
He took her hands, an oddly courtly gesture against the backdrop of the camp.
We ourselves, this love of ours that has survived so much, it might cease to exist along with the Sentinels.
That's a risk we have to take, Peter. What does the love of 2 people matter against the lives of billions? I don't even know what will happen to the younger me. I might unmake myself. But if our love was meant to be, it will be. We must believe that. Only this time, it will be in a world where our children can grow up free and unafraid. The Sentinels killed that, along with our children. If changing the past holds out even the slightest hope of undoing that, I'll do it, no matter what else the cost.
His head was bowed as he listened to her, and when she finished, he looked up with a sad smile.
I love you.
And I you, Peter, from the moment we first met.
You were only 13, Katya. Just a girl. No, love came later.
And it will still be there for us after I do this. I need you to believe that. If you don't believe it, how can I?
Then I will.
An hour later, the jammer was assembled, and they had cleared out the small room. All of them gathered briefly for a last consultation.
Kate, we cannot know exactly what will happen when this projection takes place, but you may be certain that the X-Men of 22 years ago will be highly skeptical. If I am remembering correctly, you will appear in the immediate aftermath of Jean Grey's death. The team will be grappling with that and with Scott Summers' decision to leave the X-Men for a time. Aurora, does that match your recollection?
Yes, exactly.
Are we sure this is the best way? Seems to me we're risking everything on a plan that, as powerful as we all know Rachel to be, really isn't likely to work.
If you have a better idea, Franklin, we're all listening.
Franklin looked at Rachel much as Peter was looking at Kate, a man uncomfortable in the knowledge that he was going to be a bystander while his wife took the lead, but also a man plainly worried for her, because none of them knew what was going to happen in the next hour, perhaps the last hour of their lives.
None of us has a better idea. We've talked this to death. It's time to act. If we are to die, let it not be passively.
Indeed. I spent much of my childhood in a place like this. I will not end my days in one.
Franklin held his wife's gaze a moment longer.
All right, let's do it then.
Rachel, how much time do you think you need to prepare?
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I've never done anything like this before. A few minutes of quiet to gather myself, then let's try it.
There's not going to be any trying it. Either we do it or we're all dead.
That's really helping me focus, Franklin.
I know. I'm sorry,
Magneto held up a hand. Franklin cast a worried look back at Rachel, then led the others out of the room.
Be cautious and deliberate, Rachel, but do not take too much time. Midnight is coming and we will only have one chance.
Then Magneto too was gone. At last, Rachel had a few minutes alone. She could prepare, could gather herself for a feat that even she did not know whether she could accomplish. She could ensure that Kate's persona survived the wrenching transition from this time to her teenage self, anchored 22 years in the past. She could also stew over past misdeeds and perform the fruitless calculus of transgression and atonement. How many good deeds, how many lives saved could balance the years she had spent as Ahab's hound, hunting down fugitive mutants in the early years of the Sentinel takeover? Guilty self-examination did not do much for her concentration. Rachel sat down and focused her thoughts. She slipped into the nourishing cadence of meditative breathing and stayed there, letting only the present matter. She had survived the massacre at Xavier's school. She had survived the purges and anti-mutant lynchings after that. She had done what she had to do to survive. And when she looked back at all those years, she could not believe that any path to redemption still lay open to her. Franklin believed in her, but perversely that sharpened her own self-loathing. She did not deserve him. She would, she feared, fail his trust, as she had betrayed the trust of so many others before him. Then they were walking back into the room, and Rachel no longer had the luxury of self-doubt.
Are we ready?
Franklin was the only one who approached Rachel. He took up a protective position behind her, hands resting on her shoulders.
I need a little space, Franklin.
He stepped back. She didn't look at him. If he was hurt, there was nothing she could do about that. Knowing it would distract her. Kitty leaned in close to Peter.
Go, Kate. We will do our part. Then return to us, my love.
She nodded and walked over to the thin mattress. Here she would lie while her personality, her essence, was extracted and transmitted more than 20 years into the past. Or she would die, or her mind would arrive in a stranger's body. The possibilities for mistakes were endless.
We've assembled the jammer, but it won't work for long. Our timing must be perfect, and we're also going to need a bit of luck.
Yeah, just a bit.
The jammer sat on the floor next to the mat, at Rachel's left side. It looked a bit like a teapot on 3 short legs. Its case contained a small battery, a cluster of antennae, and a multi-spectrum wave interrupter.
Kate, I don't have to be a telepath to know that your mind is going in every direction at once. You need to be calm and focused if this is going to work.
Easy for you to say.
Kate lay back on the mattress and closed her eyes, slowing her breathing and letting the chaotic swirl of her thoughts drain away until only one remained. She remembered being 13, the newest member of the X-Men. They had called her Sprite back then, and she hadn't had the confidence to tell Storm and the rest that she didn't like that codename very much, but she couldn't remember when she had changed it.
Okay, time to do this, if we're going to do it.
Franklin stood with one hand hovering over the switch of the jammer.
Rachel, are you ready?
I'm ready, but don't freak out if it doesn't happen right away. It'll probably take me a few minutes to gather Kate's consciousness and make sure I'm keeping it intact for the projection.
We'll stay out of your way.
Silence would be good. Okay, Franklin, turn it on.